Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call. 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. Or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalaya. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. Wow, it's balmy out there today. Did you feel that?
A little bit. I'm more curious how your drive back went and how you feel like your getaway went.
Well, the drive back was pretty easy, I'd say. It was cloudy, so I didn't end up sweating all the way home. That was nice. And the stretch going to and from North and South Dakota, pretty empty, especially in the middle of the day. So
pray for road construction so you have something to look at.
Yeah, I suppose. Kind of boring. It's a long, straight drive, so there's that. But, our speed limits are pretty good compared to some other states, so I'll take it.
So if you guys haven't been following along, or I don't know if we necessarily mentioned this, but Steve was looking to have a little getaway. And so he decided, why not go all the way to the North Country? So he traveled far abreast north to North Dakota and spent some time, hung out with the boys at Altispeed, came over and hung out with our church a little bit. And we had an opportunity to just obviously spend time together, hang out, but then also embark on all manner of geekisms. Geekisms, I hope we can explore. That's not a word. Explore and exploit throughout the rest of the program. But first, we have to put you to the front of the line. Steve, you ready to do some feedback?
Let's do it.
Our first email comes in from Bradley. Bradley writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I wanted to share my experience with installing and running Nextcloud on VMs, as I believe it provides unbeatable performance compared to other deployment mechanisms. I've experimented with the Docker-based deployment, including different variations of the self-built container setups. However, I found them difficult to manage and slightly underwhelming in terms of performance. Running Nextcloud on a VM with separate VMs for Apache, PHP, FPM, Redis, and MariaDB allows for fine-tuning, especially for the database. By allocating ample resources to the database, I've achieved excellent performance. As our business, we have around 20 users, syncing across 15 devices. Setup runs smoothly behind a reverse proxy with the Active Directory handling user and group management. The performance and reliability of this setup has been excellent. Adding Collabora has been straightforward. I spun up a Debian VM and installed the necessary repositories and deployed Cool WSD with just a couple of configuration tweaks. It integrated seamlessly with Nextcloud and has been working flawlessly. The only real challenge was setting up high-performance backend for Nextcloud Talk. While not impossible, the various services and terminologies required some learning. We considered purchasing a high-performance backend for Nextcloud if needed, but after configuring it, everything worked well. One aspect I'd like to refine is the backend storage. Currently, I use NFS because I wanted to manage storage separately and have it on ZFS. However, I've encountered some management challenges with NFS, particularly in terms of scaling efficiently. And while initially over-provisioned, I know that down the road, when storage needs to grow, we'll likely have to migrate everything instead of just easily expanding it. I'd love some input on a more robust, scalable storage backend solution for Nextcloud. Ideally, I'm looking for something that's easy to manage, grows efficiently. And if you have any recommendations or experiences to share, I'd really appreciate it. P.S. I cannot stress the importance of giving MariaDB lots of memory. Bradley. So, Steve, did he make a compelling case for Nextcloud? I think he made a very compelling case for Nextcloud. If I was listening to this episode and I previously didn't think much of Nextcloud, I think I would think a whole lot more of Nextcloud after reading that email, don't you?
I think that he laid out some interesting ideas, especially the idea of, kind of goes back to what you and I have talked about quite a bit, which was you can just throw an all-in-one thing at it, But really, when you're talking about providing support for users, you probably want to actually tune the individual components. Basically, any company that I ever deal with, they're going to do this. Even if you can put them all together, generally speaking, it works out in your favor if you understand the components that make up your application and then tune for them.
Absolutely. In fact, so here's the only thing. The only thing I would even just in a very minor way push back on Bradley a little bit. I agree with him 100% and you on tuning these things. However, I was able to do that inside of a container that was running inside of a VM, and so I think there are ways to accomplish both. The thing that I think we can all agree doesn't work is if you just try to pick Nextcloud up and just run it either from the all-in-one or from the little thing. It's great as a demo to see how it works. If you actually load it up with any users, it gets to be a bit rough. Here's the other thing. He said, if there's anything else you notice or, from having used it directly, the things that I've picked up on every time we've tried to host outside of a data center, and this includes DigitalOcean as well as our own server, we've struggled to get any of the real-time collaboration things to work well. In the places that we've deployed it, where it's sitting on their hardware inside of their infrastructure, that seems to work better. So take that for what it's worth. It probably depends a lot on if the kind of collaboration you're doing, like, would that example apply if you had it in your place, but your partner lives on the other side of the world? Probably not. You're probably better off going back to a data center of some sort. But, those are the things that kind of stand out to me. Steve, I'd be interested for you to address some of the back-end storage stuff. First of all, let's start here. How do you deal with back-end storage for your Nextcloud instance?
So I do exactly as this guy is doing. I use NFS on top of ZFS. Pardon me. However, we are, 4 or 5 users at most, and that's sufficient. I don't need to worry more about the type of the storage connection, because I basically tossed the 10 gig link at it and went good enough, because at 10 gigs, I'm now going to saturate my disks that are on the other side holding the backing storage. So, by the time I exceed that, I'm looking at moving to flash arrays or something like that for the storage, and that becomes a whole different conversation to begin with. However, if I was going to architect this for a client, I probably... there's a couple ways you could do this. I'm going to say the fastest in terms of most performant is going to be a local disk that you are passing the ZVol through. So if you pass your ZVol through directly into the VM and then have the VM write to local storage, that is always going to be the fastest. It's not going to scale the best, and you obviously have a single point of failure more or less, insofar as you're attaching storage directly to that VM. And so if that VM has to float around and you haven't set up shared storage properly, there's going to be some challenges there. Failing that, the next thing that I would consider would be, as much as I don't like personally the obfuscation of it, I would probably look at moving towards an S3 storage backend for Nextcloud. The reason why is because you can add additional storage pools into your S3 and allow you to kind of transparently grow the size. It almost works equivalent to adding extra disks into your pool or into your RAID device to gain more space.
Okay.
Kind of equivalent there, but doesn't have to live on the same box. Like, you can have multiple boxes feeding your S3 backend so that it's kind of split across. Now that brings with a level of complexity, but object storage is known to be more, it's considered to be a better practice than NFS when you are handling a lot like this. If you're already exceeding what an NFS can be tuned for, then your next step is to look at something like an S3 bucket, because ultimately, I believe, so you can use Ceph, you can use S3, you can use Gluster, NFS, and CIFS. I think those are the 5 or 6 storage types that Nextcloud will actually kind of natively support and have good documentation for. If you want to go with Ceph is going to be your most robust. It is also going to be a bit complicated. It's definitely a ramp up. So like if you're talking about stepping up, you've got NFS, then you've got like NFS and Samba are kind of on the same level. Then the next step up, and again, this is my opinion, would be an S3 bucket, right? There's extra complexity and extra configuration, and you're having something that needs to do that, like Minio or something like that. Then you've got, if you need even more than that, then you're talking about a Ceph or a Gluster, and that's a bunch of additional software and configuration that you have to run because, for example, Ceph has this idea of data integrity because you have to have at least 3 different nodes that are running Ceph that are working together in order for it to follow best practices. You can wedge it in with less, but you shouldn't. So that would be what I would investigate. I would look at S3 first, and if you kind of dev that out and say, you know what, I don't like this, or I need something more because I'm really forward thinking, then really you're looking at Ceph or Gluster. Okay,
interesting. How do you feel about placing things in QCOW2 files and using those as, I don't want to say container storage because that'll confuse it with something else, but a systemized way of dealing with storage that is maybe approachable for somebody who doesn't have a lot of system administration experience?
So I don't like it. I would say pass the ZVol directly in and use it like that. If you're going to go that way, again, if you're using a QCOW or a ZVol or whatever you're doing, you're tying it to that host that it's living on, or, you know, somehow exporting it. And that becomes like problematic if you need to move it around, because then you have to get into having shared storage and all of the rest of it in order for that to be effective. Now, if you got that down, sure. But I would always go and pass the block device through personally than I would using another QCOW image.
As you look to making things, so 20 users, anything else that stands out to you about this email that you would tell Bradley, or like, Bradley, listen, if I was starting over from scratch, here's what I'd be looking at, or here's how I'd be approaching this?
I mean, he already did what I basically do, is just split it out, get a good grasp on what is required, what are the individual points of contention for me. And he's already using the FPM, and he's put Redis in there, and, you know, he's got MariaDB on its own thing and working to tune that. Like, if you got that down, then really I don't think there's any need to change. I might consider making sure that gets into deployment scripts, whether that's a Chef or Ansible or Terraform or whatever it is that you're doing, right? So that when one of those components goes down, you have an eject to pull. Like you've got a ripcord to pull when you're 20 hours into the debug of this thing. You know what? It's going to be better for me to just rebuild it. And if you don't have that answer, then you're really stuck following that through to the end. Okay. If you've got that answer of like, I know how to rebuild it, this will, you know, it will work. We've battle tested it. It gives you like a relief valve when you're doing heavy troubleshooting.
Okay. Interesting. Our second email comes in from Jeremy. Jeremy says, hi, Noah and Steve. So this winter, I got a 3D printer. I started with the Bamboo A1. I've decided to return the printer, partially because it's becoming more and more difficult to connect to the printer without the cloud service. Recently, they released a firmware update that is moving towards a closed ecosystem. Having little experience with what to buy, I decided to buy a Perusa. Whoa, holy cow! A Perusa MK4S to assemble it with my kids. It was interesting, but a lengthy build, 10 to 12 hours. The Perusa ecosystem turned out to be much more friendly with open source projects, such as Octoprint and others. You can download and print all the plastic parts for the unit. The project has been a great learning experience. There are so many cool and open source 3D models, including this one, the Framework Portable Handheld Case, which turns the Framework 13 motherboard into a handheld gaming device, and then he links to printables.com. So Steve, you and I think, are cut from the same cloth when it comes to 3D printers. So let's start. What do you have in your house, and what do you think about it?
I have a Creality 6 SE, and I really like it. My only regret has been that I didn't buy the bigger one. So I funded this through Kickstarter, and the Creality 6 Max, which is a 400 by 400 bed, was only, I don't know if they've changed that now, but it was only available during the Kickstarter for a long time. And it was more expensive, but there's been a bunch of times where it would have saved me printing multiple parts if I could have printed it on the larger bed. So that's really been my only regret. I mean, it's starting to show its age now because it's, my goodness, 7 years old. And so compared to some of these new printers, like we've got a neighborhood kid, he's like, look at how quick I can print this thing. I was like, yeah, my 7-year-old printer can do it too. It'll just take it, several hours more. But, for what I use it for, I think it still does the job.
I have a Creality Ender 3, I think. The one with the auto leveling bed. I can't remember. 3 Pro maybe? Something like that. And same experience. I have had really great luck with them. Now, here's what I'll tell you in the interest of, well, why would anybody buy those other really proprietary ones that are terrible? I think to some degree, it kind of depends on what you're doing. And Steve, I would like to bat this around with you a little bit if I can. So I'll take the position of somebody who purchases something like the Bamboo. And here's the kind of person that purchases something like the Bamboo. When it isn't the tool for open source, when it is a tool to get something else done, to get the job done, and you're just trying to use it as a means of production. In that case, it's going to be less important to a lot of those people. If it works with all of the various different open source tools, they're largely just hoping that they can get a part to spit out of it. And so the difference from the people that have these and the people that use them, what I hear is the people that are comfortable with the open source / more manual ones are okay having a failed print from time to time, or having an issue and having to reprint. That's the boat I'm in. I want it because I want to understand the skill. I want to be able to take things from my laptop, from my open source laptop that I use, and I wish to bring them into real life so long as I'm willing to buy the plastic to melt it. That's my expectation of a 3D printer. And I would tell you, if that's your expectation, I would tell you the Ender is there all day long. I would tell you that when it comes to things like the Perusa, that's like a very high-end printer that's going to support open source. So the thing I'd be interested from Jeremy, if you were to write back in, I want you to compare it to your Bamboo A1. And I want you to tell me if the Perusa MK4S does all of the things that your Bamboo A1 does. And if it doesn't, are there any things that you say, well, it doesn't do this thing, but I don't care? Because that would be the boat that I'm in. When I talk to my friends who have some of these more proprietary systems, they tell me, I like the fact that it has a camera in it. I like the fact that it'll cancel the print if it starts to get out of whack. I like the fact that it has built-in AI, and so it will automatically, adjust itself to, okay, the print shifted a little bit, and so the camera takes a thing and makes a notation of the shift and then tries to move everything over, and all manner of different creative doodad things that I would never be interested in, that takes away from the experience for me for learning how to leverage a skill and starts to rely more on a service. Like at some point I asked myself, well, why wouldn't I just go to Thingiverse, upload my design there and just wait for it to show up in the mail, right? I mean, in the end, I've always been able to order custom plastic things. The thing that's exciting about me for 3D printing is I can do it in my house. If you tie that back to a cloud service, it becomes less interesting to me. But Steve, you're a very practical, reasonable person. Do you see the reality or the practicality of things like the Bamboo A1 and can compare and contrast that? Either why, yeah, I might see myself going that direction, or nope, it has to be open source for me, or I just wouldn't do it.
So it has less to do with open source, pardon me, and more to do with the fact that it is basically cloud dependent. I know there's going to be a bunch of people going to write in like how you can get around it, and there's a firmware hack that came out like about 2 weeks after they closed it down, so that it restores some of that functionality if you can find out how to do that and flash it and all the things. But it would come down to, at least specifically for the Bamboo printers, they do a really good job as far as I understand, and they're quick, but they're cloud dependent. And that is just a hard no. And that's a hard no regardless of whether it's open source or closed source at this house. Like we have I try to buy things that are open source friendly. So we've got a Dream like robot vacuum mop thing. We left the stock firmware on it. So it is closed source and all the things, but it also runs offline. So, I made that compromise specifically because I know that I can go and flash it. And it's that's just the choice that I make. So it's more about, does this thing need a service that will eventually go away? That means that this thing that I use is junk. If the answer to that is yes, then I don't buy it, just full stop. It is discounted immediately.
Interesting. So this is, I think, a thing where you influence me just a little bit. Is I'm pretty open source or nothing as it is. The difference is, I would tell you, well, I'll use it as kind of a placeholder. I have kind of put the same thing in with cloud, although I drastically moving away from that. The few things that I had a subscription to, I largely have gotten rid of, largely because I'm cheap and sick of paying for it. But I like the idea of, it's not really yours if it is a cloud thing. I have to balance that a little bit with the practicality of, well, in this particular case, I don't want to own it. I just want to use it. Like, how do you draw that line, and why don't you draw that line with 3D? So here, to make the question more concise, why are you okay with a cloud service like Telegram, but not 3D printing?
So I suppose the cloud service of Telegram is not really essential to anything. Like, if it went away, like, I didn't pay anything for it. That's the first thing.
Right? Okay.
I didn't pay for it, and so there's some trade-offs there. There's also and it's a different class. I don't think it's a fair question, because Telegram is meant to be a messaging platform that needs to be available everywhere, or else it doesn't really serve its function.
Gotcha. Okay,
right?
So connectivity is a necessary component of Telegram, where you would say connection is not a necessary thing to print a plastic thing. Why is that there?
Exactly, right? So I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point in the future, but the open source solutions, we've tried tons of them in terms of the messaging protocols, and they just fall flat on their face. And at the end of the day, we all are going to make some level of concessions, unless you're, Stallman. And even then, apparently he just grabbed somebody else's laptop that has the thing on it that he needs, so he can say he never installed it on his machine. But we all make some level of compromise. And honestly, the chat thing's not something I'm going to win. I couldn't fight that network effect, even if the open source stuff was good enough, which it's not.
So write in, Jeremy. Let us know what you're thinking, how things go, how it turns out. We would love to follow up on this and ride the Nextcloud wagon with you. Our third email comes in from Avari. Avari writes in and says, "Hey, Noah and Steve, in the last show, you talked about using AI for interviews. Check this tool out. It's a tool that shows you help on the screen and seems to hide from Zoom, but can be seen by the user sharing his or her screen." So, Steve, creepy or cool?
Terrible.
Terrible, he says.
Yeah, I think it's a terrible idea. I mean, at the end of the day, so I have a short tangent for you. So, as you know, that I'm often involved in some level of interviewing for Red Hat, and was recently doing rounds of this, and there was one guy who was 100% using AI for this. 100%. There's no doubt in my mind. And part of it was because he was doing pretty good interpreting the answers and not reading them verbatim at the start of the interview, but about halfway through, your answers are not the way a human would say that, and they're also not correct.
Did you call him out on it?
No, we don't. We generally are gentler. I will be gently that's not exactly what I was looking for, and then I will restate in order, because sometimes
mistake.
It's the way that I'm trying to ask the question that is not understood well, and then that doesn't give you a good measure of the person.
Sure.
But 100%, this guy was using AI to do that. And I, in our kind of post wrap up, the interviewers get together afterwards, and I was like, I kind of give the guy props for having the chutzpah to actually try and do this. I'm kind of amused by it, because out of the 30 or so that we've done this week, this is the first guy that did something creative to try and beat the system.
He's trying.
He is trying, but also probably means he's pretty terrible at the thing you're asking.
So I'll share a real Red Hat story. not inside Red Hat, the company, but at one of my testing sessions, there was a student who I can't remember. I think it was he couldn't remember how to configure a repo. But for whatever reason, he was able to find his way into the instructor's box, copy the RPM that he needed to install it. When the instructor determined what he did, he was a little bit confused. And so he calls Red Hat to seek clarifications, like, here's the deal, this is what the guy did, blah, blah, blah. And Red Hat's answer was brilliant, and to this day lends me tremendous respect to them. They asked him, did he bring materials that wasn't into the classroom? Because that would be a violation of the testing policy, and it's an automatic failure. Nope, he did not. Did he access the internet, which would be a violation of the testing policy and would cause an automatic failure? Nope, he did not. Then he passes. They didn't care how he did it in the lab environment. It's the box survived a reboot. It did the things that he was supposed to do. He got dinged for not having the repo thing in there, but the package was there. And so all the things, in the end, the job got done. And so I'd be almost tempted, Steve, to maybe not hire him for whatever it was you were trying to get him through the door, but like, hey, we've got a janitor position or whatever. If you can work out that, well, but really though, you've got an integrity thing that concerns me more than anything else. You'll get the technical chops. I have no doubt. You're obviously very committed and you're obviously very dedicated. Why don't you start here as a janitor or filling the toilet bowls or whatever it is? And if you can work out that integrity thing of lying to my face, then we would love to have you on our team. Could be really great and give the guy an opportunity to make something, to grow into something. It could be kind of an interesting idea.
Could be. It could be. Anyways, my one of my other co-interviewers was incensed at it. He's like, the guy is cheating. He's like, well, yes, I suppose that's true.
I mean, if you think about it, your coworker is incensed because what the guy is really saying without saying it is, Steve, you're too stupid to figure out that I don't actually know the answers to the questions that you're answering or that you're asking me, but I'm smarter than you, so I will go find the information and I'll do your job too, and you won't know. That's kind of what he's saying. And that's why your coworker's incensed, because that's kind of a arrogant thing to be told.
Yeah, I mean, at some point, the reason why I was amused and kind of split on it was because in the real world, if somebody asks you a question, you're allowed to go look things up.
Yes, 100%. In fact, what do we mind more in the technical world? The guy who always has the answer, 90% of it's true, 10% of it's made up. It's your job to figure out where that line is. Or the guy who never opens his mouth unless he knows what he's talking about and has already gone and looked up the information. So you don't even ask what the source of the information is because he's already got it handed for you and there's probably a link in your inbox that links to exactly what that kind of thing. So, I mean, yeah, to me, the integrity thing would more than anything else, but.
Yep. I mean, we didn't explicitly say, no AI assisting during your interviews, right? It's just like we don't explicitly say you can't use searching during the interview.
Sure.
So I mean, he technically didn't break any rules, but yeah. So that I was on the fence, and when the other people voted, I was like, that's fine. I'm not going to fight this.
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't go to bat for the guy for sure, but. Very interesting. Last semi-tangentially related thing, then we'll move on. But many years ago, not that, 10 years ago. So I walked into a hotel lobby of one of the many hotels that we do service for. And I see this kid using the guest kiosk. Doesn't really stand out to me. People use the guest kiosk. It's a little weird that it's a kid, not a parent around, but whatever. About 45 minutes later, I notice he's still there. So I look at the screen just to get, are we playing video games? Are we vegging out to YouTube? What's going on? And I notice he's in a terminal. And I'm like, what are we doing? So I walk up a little bit and I'm quiet and I'm kind of at the back and he's just exploring. He's catting proc CPU info. He's looking at memory. He's looking at this. He's looking at that. And so I watch for a couple of seconds and I go over and introduce myself and I'm like, hey, do you want to play more than just play? The kiosk kind of locked down, right? It doesn't let you do a lot of things or whatever. I'm like, hey, do you want to play with more of this? And so I took, at that time, there was no, if there was, it was early days, like Tails, that sort of thing. But there was Canopix, which was at the time a little CD thing that you could boot into, and you could do whatever you wanted to Canopix, and then when you were done, you just take it back out. So booted that up, and so far as I know, he spent the vast majority of the rest of the night playing on that thing. He was certainly there when I left, and I thought, you know what? This is an okay thing. It's okay sometimes to bend/break the rules. If it gets for the right reasons, it's okay to be a rascal. That's what I'm trying to get at. So sometimes it's okay to reward the people that appear at first glance like they're doing something. Our fourth email comes in from PIX. PIX says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I'm really liking your show since discovering it a few months ago. I recently set up Graphene OS on a Pixel with the intent of migrating from my iPhone. As I'm not ready to finally pull the plug, I'd like to auto-forward my iPhone's SMS messages, Mint Mobile, to my VoIP MS number in the interim. It's easy to forward calls to iOS from one number to the other, but it's much more challenging to forward SMS. An extensive search returned only two choices. A script to rummage around macOS chat.db file, iOS, Mac are linked, but this depends on the macOS Apple client ID as force match, which I don't use. The forward SMS text forwarder running on iOS, but this forwards only to email, Teams, Slack, and Discord. Can you think of another way to do this? Thanks." So Steve, I'm taking it this is probably more up my alley than yours.
Totally you.
Okay. So here's what I would do. I would walk, not run, over to beeper.com. Beeper.com has a way to bridge iMessage to Matrix. So you'll be able to download Beeper onto your Mac and you'll run a Beeper bridge. It will run on your Mac. It will sign into your Apple account, and then it will sync all of the iOS messages with your Beeper account, which you can then put on your Graphene OS phone. They used to have it to where they publicly hosted it, and it was great. And I used it and I loved it. And it was actually kind of a sad state of affairs, to be honest with you, that iOS got there first insofar as at the time that it was working on a public bridge, I could type the name of any person that had an iPhone, and if I had their email address or phone number, I could send them a Matrix message and they would receive it via iMessage, complete end-to-end encrypted. Didn't break the encryption. It was phenomenal. As you might imagine, Apple lost their ever-loving cookies over the idea that somebody could make something that could get the little blue check mark. Oh my gosh, how insecure. We're sending direct encrypted messages without going through Apple. This is a terrible catastrophe. So they kind of shut it down. They didn't completely shut it down. They said, if you're a user and you're running off of your own private IP address, you can do this. If you are a group trying to do this in mass, we're gonna block you. And so there's no public way to do it anymore. But if you set up the iOS bridge on your Mac, the only downside is you got to make sure that your Mac is running. But so long as it is, it will bridge your iMessage over to Beeper, and then just download the Beeper app or Element or whatever other Matrix client you wish to use, and you can place that directly on, and then you can get your iMessage on your computer and on your phone, Graphene OS, and anywhere else. A nice dovetail from one Matrix thing to the next. So the Matrix Foundation has fully split from Element, the company. Now, this is in response to essentially what happened was they needed to get to a place to where they were going to be able to make money. And so to do that, EMS, Element Matrix Services, the company that was previously New Vector, designed Element written in Python and designed Synapse written in Python, designed Element, which is essentially like a web wrapper inside of a web wrap client, and it works about what you'd expect. They got a tremendous amount of initial onboarding from companies and governments and all the rest of it, and said, "Hey, develop this thing." And so they went back to the ground and said, "Okay, if we're starting over, how would we design it from the ground up?" And that's where you get Dendrite, and that's where you get Element X, which is where all of the development has moved to. Well, as part of doing that, they're going to these large organizations and saying, "Hey, we're going to either custom develop features for you, or we'll help you roll it out at scale, or we'll help you, in the case of Germany, switch over their entire healthcare." Those sorts of things are all switching over to it. That's where their money is coming from. And so that's the customer base that they had to focus on. In an effort for responsible leadership, they said, "Hey, we should probably have the people that are making the decisions separate from the people that are tied to the checkbooks." So Matrix, the organization that governs the Matrix spec and all of the open sourcey nature things of Matrix, is one thing, and now completely separately and divorced from EMS, New Vector / the business side that sells services around Element or Matrix. The downside to them doing that is they lost half their budget. That has meant they need to scale back drastically their efforts. They're at somewhat of a crisis point, and they're asking for your help. Here's the ask. They are trying to raise $100,000 by March. If they don't raise $100,000 by March, their only choice is to cut back in the services that they offer. From their perspective, they've been doing this for almost 10 years and have been offering various different free services by way of bridging, by way of public hosting, matrix.org being the largest Matrix server, something that it was never originally designed to, and they have faithfully continued to modify and update to keep it running in wake of more and more users. They've gone out to places like Canonical and Fedora and all of these other, KDE, all of these other projects and said, hey guys, would you be able to move your communication platform over to Matrix so that we can all collaboratively work together? But that costs money to get people out there, to get people speaking, to get people talking, to get people involved in those efforts. That all costs money. And now the Matrix Foundation is having to absorb all of that while EMS/Element focuses on their customers because that is what's going to bring money in long term. So they're asking for your help. The way to do so is pretty easy. Go to matrix.org/support. They have an individual plan. It's only $60 for the year. So if you're thinking about it right, that's like one extra streaming channel a month. That's like one, soy milk latte from Starbucks. I mean, it's $6. I mean, it's not even $6. It's just pennies. You can afford to do that. $60 a year. You're supporting organization. Frankly, you're supporting this show by doing so to a degree, because we rely on that for the Geek Lab. We rely on it for all of our preparation. We rely on that for all of our coordination. I rely on it personally for many things. And so this company has lent its product and put its best foot forward first to try to help out the community. Now they're asking for something in return. So if you're able to do so, donate by going to matrix.org/support. If you're not able to do so, the second thing I would do is I would try to do advocacy. Try to go out and talk to people and say, hey, if it's somebody who doesn't have a lot of technical, is somewhat of a technical noob, hey, check out Beeper. If it's, hey, you're a nerd, you want to explore all of the fancy security features, check out Element. If you want to see the latest and greatest, check out Element X. If you want to host your own server, go that route. If you want to use the public instance, do that route. From the article, quote, in practice, the foundation needs an additional $610,000 in revenue just to break even. But this $100,000 would extend our runway 1 month while we work on landing grants and new members. So, I've never asked for money directly. I like to support the things that make the things that we do possible. This is absolutely one of those things. So I'm going to ask you to do that if you're capable of doing so. If you're not financially capable of doing so, I get that too. The ask there would then be, well, can you just go and talk to a friend about, hey, here's a really cool piece of technology. Would you be willing to check that out? Click on become a member. You can click on the individual plan. They'll give you a free Matrix ticket to the conference if that's something you're interested in doing. But it helps the ecosystem grow. So we would ask that you do that. Again, matrix.org/support. So Steve made the drive all the way from Cy Oaks Falls, South Dakota to Grand Forco, North Dakota. Now, Steve, I'm going to guess you're going to tell me the climate wasn't a whole lot different from one to the other, but the tech maybe was a little.
Well, I mean, I went and sat in a hotel, so my tech was quite a bit different. My command system was 3 laptops hooked together on a switch that I brought with me, hooked up to a little Mango router. So that was quite different than what I normally have. Why did you bring 3 laptops into a hotel room, connect them to a switch, and add a Mango router? What were you doing? Well, so the one laptop is just functioning as essentially a glorified file server. It had a Pacman repo. It's got NFS. It's got a bunch of stuff like that is meant to spare you when you are on slow internet. So caching and all that kind of stuff. So that's that one. And the other 2 laptops, one of them is my dev laptop. So I blow it away all the time. And honestly, I never even remember what state it's in by the time I pick it up again. Like sometimes I'm surprised. I'm like, oh, that had OpenSUSE on it. I'd forgotten all about that. So it just kind of hangs out and serves its purpose. Basically, I blow it away and it never has anything on it that I need to care about. And so I was working on, so some time ago, I had made a series of playbooks that will install Arch Linux and give you ZFS on root. And that was well and good for my desktop, but it was time for me to say goodbye to Fedora on my laptop, at least for now. I started to have a bunch of stuff that I couldn't end up solving. I might have been able to dig through it eventually, but it's one of those things that you never think to go rooting through until you actually stub your toe on the problem. And then you forget about it because it's annoying. So if I wake it up from sleep, it was noticeably laggy. Like, tell me you didn't see how laggy it was at points.
Oh, yeah. To the point that I would have thought there was something physically wrong with your computer.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with the computer. It's just like, it would go to sleep, and if you try to surf the internet, it would react as if it couldn't reach a DNS server, for example. Or I had a web browser open, and I type in the web browser, and there was a noticeable lag typing in the web browser. Like, that shouldn't be. I'm on, like, physical hardware. I'm not even remoted into anything. So anyways, the whole purpose was we have a policy that says the laptop needs to be encrypted. And so I needed to retinker my playbook to allow me to do that. And it turned out to be non-trivial, the route that I went down. So a bunch of people will be screaming, hey, don't you know that ZFS has native encryption? I do know that. I was not using that route for a couple of reasons. So first of all, and this is a silly one, I admit, but it does not have, ZFS does not have any kind of Ansible module that I was able to find that would help me do this. Why is that relevant? Because one of the things that you have to do when you're setting up the ZFS native encryption is enter the password twice. There's key files and different stuff that you can do, but at any rate, I wanted to be prompted for a password. In addition to this, one of the things that is a little bit tinfoil hat, but if you simply encrypt one of your data sets, it doesn't prevent anybody from knowing what data sets are there and what drives are involved. It's a laptop. Obviously, there's only going to be 1 or 2 or 3 drives. Like, there's a limited number of drives that are going to be a part of it. However, it was just one of those things that I'm like, well, I don't really like that. Like, if I want to encrypt the drive, I want the entire thing to be basically like a lockbox. So I went down the route of trying to use Lux with ZFS en route. I was successful, but man, was that a journey. It was one of those things where you change one little thing and you had a massive ripple effect somewhere else down the line. And so I ended up putting a bunch of like changes in parts of the playbook that I didn't even like anticipate needing to change. And so it was not trivial for me. I'm sure somebody else out there would have like ripped through it and like, why did that take you? I did it 10 times less amount of time. Yep, you probably did, but I didn't understand. I did not take the time to understand the bits that I was trying to connect because I thought, well, I've got this playbook that already does the ZFS stuff. All I'm doing is like putting Lux on top, like underneath that. So it should just be, like I honestly thought it would be like 4 or 5 hours, like maybe a day. Nope, not for me, because I didn't stop to understand how that was going to change the way all of the things interacted, and that was my bad.
Do you mind addressing your troubleshooting approach? When you came across a problem, what was kind of the where do I start approach?
Well, so kind of embarrassingly, I've been chatting with a few people about this, listener Brandon and yourself, and a few others who often will utilize some sort of AI to help troubleshoot. And the challenge that I had here was that I have enough requisite knowledge that by the time that I'm going to ask the AI something, it's already a niche problem. Like, it's something that is not prolific out there. So would an AI be able to help me with that? Turns out no. It sent me down a whole bunch of different paths that were just terrible. to include, at one point, it had me run a command, which, in fairness, I looked at it and was like, I told it, and like, that's going to do something bad. But it gave me a command that wiped off all the metadata off the ZFS pool. And like, I ran it anyways because it's on my dev laptop and I don't really care. I wanted to, like, sometimes you have a hunch and you look at that like that shouldn't work that way, but it does for whatever reason, right? Or you just misunderstand what you're reading. So I was like, well, that looks fishy. I don't think it's going to do what I want it to do, but I'm going to run it anyways. And I did, and it wiped out the metadata on the drive.
Ooh.
Well, wonderful. Thank you, AI. So I spent all this time kind of futzing around with the problem, and ultimately, at least on the last day that I was working on it, after about 4 or 5 hours, it gave up, and I put it down for the night. And the next morning, I'm like, I'm not going to touch an AI. I'm just going to like do the old internet search thing myself. And within 10 minutes, I had found what I was looking for and solved my problem.
Huh. So what's the lesson there?
Well, I suppose my lesson, so when talking with you and a few other people that have actually used AI for troubleshooting, turns out we all have had similar experiences. It's like we've gotten some really good wins in specific areas with the AI, and we hope that will extend to generic troubleshooting. And every person that I talked to has said, nope, that thing actually cost me significantly more time than if I had have like never known that I could use an AI to troubleshoot.
Do you think that'll change over time?
It's possible. It really depends on how niched down that you get, right? Because the less people talking about it on the internet, the less information there is for the AI to hoover up and understand, right? And you know, I tried a litany of things. Actually, I tried the OpenAI, I tried the reasoning model, I tried DeepSeek, I tried every company now has come out with their like quote unquote deep research. I tried the Anthropic model, like, and I mean from them, not self-hosting, because that
Sure.
has its own thing, right? Like
Introduces a new variable.
Exactly. Well, not only that, like there's a cutoff time, right? The model that I can run locally is going to pale in comparison to these places that have the giant iron to run the bigger models. So, you know, so yeah, my takeaway from that is I really need to divorce myself from generically using AI, because when I ask it, like if I can give it really specific, like I'm looking for this, or tell me what this built-in does,
yeah.
like I can get that information super quick and it's accurate and it can basically work like a smart man page.
Okay.
But at least from my experience and the people I've spoken to, that's about where it ends. Like if you can't ask it specific questions, it might be able to point you in the right direction, but it seems to be just as likely to send you down the rabbit hole in the wrong way. So I'll give you a very specific example.
Okay.
One of the things that it sent me down was like, Arch by default uses make init CPO to build the init RAM FS.
Okay.
And one of the things it sent me down the hole of is like, oh, well, you should replace this with Dracut. And that took me like 6 or 7 hours in the wrong direction, because it turned out to not be a problem with any of that to begin with. On a thing that I wasn't already very, like, I've used make init CPO. I understand how it functions because it's been around forever. I've never actually personally configured Dracut, right? Like Fedora uses it, RHEL uses it. I've never had to touch it. It just does its thing, right? But what it suggested was try and inject the kernel arguments and build them right into the init RAMFS so that you don't have to pass kernel arguments into it. That is something apparently that Dracut can do. I just couldn't get it to do it or work appropriately.
Okay. So, yeah, you know, it's funny too, because I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who uses AI in his business and has it scrape his ticket system, and he has a great experience with it. So I assume, at least to some degree, it's a function of getting all of the things tuned and plugged in and dialed into your specific circumstance.
Well, that's definitely part of it. But if he's using it and feeding it data off of his, ticketing system or whatever it was that you said, he's already like being very specific about a thing.
Okay.
Right. And so he's already narrowed down its search to like, I only want you to search this corpus of knowledge, and I'm looking for this. Like there are specific queries that you're running at, and if you can get specific enough, it can do the job. Like there's this whole idea of prompt engineering, which is a study of like, how do I get the AI to do the thing I want it to do, essentially. And so that's totally a thing. Just like Google Foo was a thing back in the day, where like, people who are familiar with Jupiter Broadcasting, there was a guy named Rikai, and he was famous for his ability to like dance around Google. Right?
Still is.
So that's a thing that still exists, but for us people who haven't invested enough time into how to make that work, I guess the more specific you can get, the better.
So one of the things that you were kind enough to do is spend some time with myself and my team in our shop, and just you largely we connected a computer for you to a TV in the shop, and then just said, Steve, go, ready, set, go. And the ask was, show me containers from a starting point, from something where a person who has no previous experience with containers can have an easy win. Can you describe for me what we went through?
I mean, 30 seconds or less, I guess. What we walked through was, we started with the basics of like what you should conceptualize a container from, which is it's not a complete operating system. And there are a whole bunch of stuff that we don't have time for in this little segment that we've got. Then we kind of looked at, here's what makes up a container file, in the Docker world, also called a Docker file. And we started to take a look at a compose file, which is a way to start a container in a consistent manner without you having to pass in all the flags. And it's a nice YAML file that kind of dictate, these are your startup parameters. So we walked through, what is an image? What is a container? How do they relate to each other? Where do I get these things, and how do I build them?
Awesome. Yeah. And it was nice because it gave us an opportunity, myself particularly, to just kind of sit down and say, okay, well, if I was going to start here, it's one thing. The difference between the script kiddies and the samurai are the people that know all of the things that you're doing. And Steve, one of the things that I deeply respect about you, and one of the things that I was deeply appreciative of your time, was you're willing to lend that knowledge back out. Then we spent some time over at the church. Suffice to say, it was a bunch of Christian nerds digging through all manner of different technical problems. And then in between, is it safe to say the conversation in between the little projects we were doing was as much fun, if maybe not more enjoyable, than the projects themselves?
I mean, because the projects, nothing actually worked smoothly the first time we'd run a command, yes, but that's just how it goes, right? It
is. And I would also tell you, in your defense, there was no preparation, right? Like we handed him a blank computer and we were like, here, show us. In that case, it was AI stuff. And it was it's fun to see what is possible. It's also fun to see the breadth of knowledge that Steve, you have, and the open source tools that are out there. Everything from LM Studio, if you want to just get something up and running on your laptop, to Rile AI, if you want some very customized thing that you can feed it, as Steve would say, a corpus of knowledge, and then have it spit back information. Very cool stuff. And I was really deeply honored, and it was a lot of fun. We'll do it again sometime. Music in our ears? That means the fun's over, at least for this week. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. If you want to find out the latest, hey, we're on X. I'm at Colonel Linux. He's at Linux Evans, the show at Ask Noah Show. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. AskNoahShow.com. Have a good week!